the calling of was it the calling of Saint John?
Mhm.
Or the calling of Saint Matthew. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Anybody can paint the Pieta. Anybody can paint, Hercules. Anybody can paint that at any time, and it really is just calling back to an ancient time. As to where the portraiture is, it is by definition a snapshot of the time,
Yeah,
and in a lot
and
of
it's interesting kind of the arc that Sargent does, through the Gilded Age, and I'm going to suspect immediate post World War One, and that's going to be very dramatic.
yeah, very much so, very much so. So, yeah, in a way, the portrait artists were kind of like the J.C. Penney family portrait studio, at the
Oh, God.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, they kind of were, like, everybody wanted to get like, when I was a kid growing up, we got family portraits every year.
Mhm.
Um, they take school pictures every year, and in a way, these portrait artists were kind of the same, although artists like Sargent were only accessible by very wealthy patrons. Um, but we'll cover that. Let me get into the biography here, and we'll go forward. So, John Singer Sargent was born on January 12th in 1856 in Florence, Italy, to American expatriate parents. Dr. Fitzwilliam Sargent, who was an eye surgeon at the Philadelphia Medical Center, and Mary Newbold Sargent. Um, his father again was an eye surgeon, but they left the United States for Europe in 1854 and lived a largely roaming expatriate life afterward. Sargent was the eldest surviving child. His surviving sisters were Emily, and these are all Sargent's paintings. This is a portrait John Sargent painted of his sister Emily.
Mm.
Um, she was born in 1957, and his sister Violet was, or 1857, and his sister Violet was born in 1870. They had two other children, but none of them survived very long. They died very young. Um, so he had a privileged but unstable childhood in Europe, and his family spent winters in Nice and Rome and Florence and the Alps and in Pau and also in Biarritz on the beaches here,
Mm.
among other resort cities in Europe. He grew up immersed in culture, surrounded by museums, churches, languages, and landscapes. When he was young, his father had hoped that he'd pursue a career in the Navy because he has lineage that goes back to old military generals.
Mm.
But it soon became clear that his future laid in the arts. His mother was an amateur watercolorist and an enthusiastic traveler, and his father was a skilled medical illustrator. His mother encouraged him to sketch constantly while they traveled across Europe. He received an early formal education in Rome in 1868, then studied intermediately at the Accademia dei Arti in Florence between 1870 and 1873. But by 1874, the family concluded that Paris offered the best serious training available. So Sargent grew up to be a highly literate and cosmopolitan young man, accomplished in art and music and literature, and he was
Mm.
fluent in English, French, Italian, and German at the age of 17.
How far our education system's fallen?
Right. So, again, in 1874, at the age of 18, his family took him to Paris for formal education. And as we discussed tirelessly, Paris was one of the centers of the European art world at the time. Um, he entered this private studio of Carolus Duran, and this is a portrait painted by Singer in 1879.
Mm.
And Duran was a very talented portrait painter. This is a painter that he did. This is called The Kiss, and it's a self-portrait of him and his wife as newlyweds.
Mm.
But he was also a realist painter, and this is another one of his works called The Merrymakers, which I think there's a really interesting contrast in style. The Merrymakers has a lot more of a realist look to it,
Hmm.
and it's a technically brilliant painting. Um,
Hmm.
Additionally, he attended drawing classes at the École des Beaux-Arts, which we've talked about before, and that gave him a high degree of technical competence. Carolus Duran taught a method of painting known as au premier coup, or at first touch, but now it's more commonly known as wet on wet.
Hmm.
And this is a painting by Diego Velázquez called the Jester of Calabicias, and it was painted in 1837.
Hmm.
Um, so instead of building everything slowly through layers, students were encouraged to apply loaded brushstrokes confidently, which helped create Sargent's reputation for his confident and bold brushwork. In 1876, he attended an impressionist exhibition where he met and befriended Claude Monet.
Hmm.
And this is one of Monet's most iconic paintings, The
Hmm.
Woman with the Parasol, Madame Monet and Her Son, painted in 1857. In 1879, he traveled to Spain and copied the works of Velázquez at the Prado Museum. And this is Diego Velázquez. This is his portrait of Pope Innocent X from 1650.
Hmm.
Uh, he visited in 1880. He visited Holland and Belgium, where he studied the work of Frans Hals, who was another uh, portraitist or kind of realist painter. But this is a jester with a lute, and this is from 1620.
Hmm.
So these two influences were key in developing Sargent's style. Velasquez gave him an aristocratic space, dark elegance, and restraint, and Halls gave him movement, visual brushwork, and a brave handling of the subjects. So, so after arriving in Paris in 1874, a scant 3 years later, at the age of 21, he would enter the public scene. Um, And this is one of his paintings. This is a portrait of Francis Shelley-born Ridley Watts, or Francis Sherborne Ridley Watts from 1877. And between 1877 and 1884, he was heavily involved in the Paris art scene as a student of Carolus Duran, and especially the competitive salon scene. One of his first public exhibitions was of his friend Fanny Watts, who is this person pictured here. Um,
Hmm.
The Met frames the Paris decade as his meteoric rise, with Sargent moving through a cosmopolitan circle of artists, writers, patrons, and sitters who become the subjects of his daring early portraits. And again, as stated previously, from 79 to 80, he traveled where he absorbed the works of Velázquez and dance culture in Spain. He also traveled to Morocco and eventually visited Venice in 1880 and 1882. Um, and 1882 was an early peak in his career, and it leads to our next two paintings.
Right.
So jump over to the first one here. This is The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit. Painted in 1882. It's an oil on canvas, and it measures 87 and 3/8 by 87 and 5/8 inches, or 221.93 and 2 by 222.57 centimeters. And it's currently located at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The painting depicts the four daughters of Sargent's friend, the Boit family, in their Paris apartment. And at first glance, it should be a charming portrait of four little girls. However, continued inspection shows it's not just a normal family portrait. The children aren't gathered in like the typical portrait position, close and affectionate. They're spread out into separate psychological zones.
Hmm.
The girl on the left in the red dress, she's starkly visible, and isolated, while the youngest is playing in the foreground with a doll, in a pretty standard portrait pose and portrait position. Um, while the two older girls are set back and partially absorbed in the darkness. One of them's not even looking at the subject. She's kind of staring off like she doesn't want to be there, which could very well be.
I was about to say, this may be the most accurate portrait I've ever seen.
Right. So the image almost comes off as more of a still life than a portrait, um, in that it's not, it's not clear exactly who the subject, the one specific subject is. It's the scene is kind of the subject. So Sargent paints childhood not as a sentimental innocence, but as a separation, mystery, and kind of interior life. And this painting has a distinct connection to a painting by Velázquez called Las Meninas,
Hmm.
or Meninas. The square room composition, along with the deep shadows and dark recesses and ambiguous relationship, connect the works together and gives a hint as to Sargent's motivations for the layout.
Hmm. Well,
However, while this painting, um, Velasquez's work, shows a lively theater, Sargent's is stark and very somber. The the two tall blue and white vases are not just decoration, because they tower over the girls and echo the vertical human forms, almost becoming silent guardians or doubles within the room, while also being hallmarks of a wealthy family and helping to reinforce the scale. Children are small, but the apartment is vast, and it makes the children feel even smaller by comparison. And Sargent uses this work to show that portraiture can be more than likeness. It can be atmosphere, hierarchy, and silence. And another note about this painting is where it's at in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The portrait is actually put between two giant blue vases, just like the ones in the painting.
oh,
So yeah,
that's brilliant.
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, one thing, just looking at this from a framing perspective, it's very asymmetric, which really
Yeah,
helps.
it does. It really, I think that the asymmetry leads to um well, there's some tension to it, and then it draws your eye from the little girl to the girl in red to the older girls, and then just kind of to that empty space.
Mm-hmm.
And that the red
Room
partition
divider,
over
or
by the yeah,
yeah.
room divider over by the other vase really gives it it it, it gives it it gives it an interesting counterbalance.
And I also
And
like
of course,
the mirror in the background, also framed between two blue vases.
yeah, yeah, and this, I mean, this picture is kind of rough when you zoom in on it. The picture of the painting is kind of rough, but the painting itself, he does an excellent job of kind of capturing the light, especially the angles of light on the girls' dresses to give them um, that clean, bright white look that you would expect off of a clean white dress.
Mm.
So, speaking of white dresses, we'll move into the next painting. Um, and this one is El Jaleo. Uh, oh, that's the wrong one. There it is, El Jaleo, painted in 1882 also, and this is an oil on canvas, and this one is fucking huge.
Mm.
It measures 91 by 5/16 inches, and by 5/16, 137 inches. 100, yeah, 91 and 5/16 by 137 inches, or 232 by 348 centimeters, and it currently residing in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And this painting grew out of Sargent's travels in Spain and North Africa in 1879, and especially his exposure to Spanish music and culture and dance. The work shows that Sargent was just not just a talented portraitist, but a talented artist in terms of composition and his ability to capture action and dynamic scenes. The composition is like a stage where the dancer dominates the center, her white skirt catching the light, while her upper body, wrapped in a black shawl, dissolves kind of into shadow. The musicians sit in a horizontal row against the gray wall, largely obscured, turning them into dark rhythmic shapes rather than idealized portraits. The dancer with her raised arm and twisted torso and lifted skirt and trailing black fabric make the whole image feel like a single dramatic instance. Much of the painting is built from blacks and grays, browns and whites, and smoky shadows, with only flashes of warmer colors. And that restraint really makes the dancer's white skirt explode visually out of the darkness. And at nearly 12 feet wide, the painting feels less like a window and more like a performance space. The musicians form a dark visage in the background while the dancer cuts across the scene with motion and light. The painting
Hmm.
shows Sargent as a painter of performance. He does not simply paint a dancer, he paints rhythm, shadow, sound, uh, and the charge of a live audience. So, um, yeah, nearly 12 feet. This is a gigantic painting. Um, and I'm sure that seeing it in person would be really astounding. Like, very, because these people are going to be damn near life size if you see it in person.
Right.
Um,
Well, so this
and I,
is something that struck me. It's almost kind of an inverted Kairusko.
yeah, yeah, very much so. Where the negative space exists, like the people are captured in negative space
Mm-hmm.
instead of the space enclosing on them. They're set deep inside of the space instead of being surrounded by the scene. They're embedded into it.
Oh, and
Um,
LGM caught on to it too. That's good. Good man.
yeah. And again, and if you saw this in person, I'm sure it would just be a phenomenal piece to see up close and see the brushwork. The angle of her hand and the detail on her hand is really interesting. Um,
Because it looks like she's playing castanets.
she may be. That was a Spanish dance at the time. And the way she's holding her dress and dancing is very dynamic. And I think it gives it a really good, interesting feel to the portrait.
And this is just, something I've been really excited about with Sargent covering him is there's a lot of it where it's realism, but it's also got a lot of, kind of symbolism thrown in. So he's crossing
Yeah,
multiple boundaries. And it's nice because it's not like he was sold on, well, I have to be part of this school of art. I have to,
yeah, definitely.
or like with Klimt, which it's like he's taking a lot of these swirling influences and making it accessible to everyone, but still very much a high end kind of item at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. That Sargent doesn't belong to a single tradition. And I think that's why he's often referred to as more of an academic artist because he does combine so many different styles. I mean, obviously, you can see the kind of baroque chiaroscuro in here, and then when you zoom in, you see, the face does look real, but then when you zoom in, you see the brushwork, the heavy brushwork, which lends itself more to an impressionistic feel than just the realism that people like Caravaggio, the hard lines. Of course, there are some hard lines in here, but they're really more defined by the light than by the brushwork.
And just another
So,
little
uh,
fascinating thing with the tassels or whatever the hell you want to call it. Just these like little
mhm.
swirls of brightness in the midst of her dark dress. It is just a fascinating touch.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. because it really highlights, the lighting from the front that you would see on a stage, and how the dark swirling shawl would catch glimpses of the light, and it makes it seem more iridescent.
Hmm.
And we'll see more of that iridescence in an upcoming work. But first, we're going to move on to the Paris scandal. So in 1882, Sargent's most ardent supporters believed his portraiture is only matched by Velázquez. And here's another painting by Velázquez, and this is the Triumphant Bacchus, or the Drunks, from 1628 to 1629, which obviously has a very Baroque realist feel to it, but it does an excellent job of capturing the faces of the subjects,
Hmm.
or the faces of the people. Maybe not, they may not have been sitting subjects. Um, so in 1883, his best portraits reveal the individuality and personality of the sitters. Sargent's work does. And in
Hmm.
1883, he begins work on a portrait that becomes Madame X. And the sitter was Virginie Amelia Avano Gautreau, who was this woman here,
Hmm.
who was also known as Madame Pierre Gautreau. She was a Louisiana-born figure in Parisian high society.
Hmm.
She was known in Paris for her carefully constructed appearance, and Sargent hoped the portrait would enhance his own reputation. Importantly, this was not a standard commission. Uh, he painted it without formal commission, but he did paint it with her cooperation. And he was not merely fulfilling a patron's request. He was making a calculated salon picture.
Hmm.
Gautreau was the perfect subject for Sargent. She had a striking profile, pale skin. She wore a black gown with jeweled straps, and a public persona already built around beauty and notoriety. She was a living performance of Parisian glamour, and Sargent wanted to turn that performance into a masterpiece. And that leads us into our next painting, which is this one,
Hot damn.
um, called "The Portrait of Madame X," painted in 1883 to 1884. For that 1884 Paris Salon, it's oil on canvas, and it measures 82 and 1/8 by 43 and 1/4 inches, or 208.6 by 109.9 centimeters. And this is currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So, as mentioned previously, the subject was Virginie Amelia Avano Gautreau, and she was the wife of an influential French banker. She was famous for her beauty, public presence, and carefully cultivated appearance. Gautreau is standing in an elegance beside a table, dressed in a sleek black gown with jeweled straps. Her skin is unnaturally pale, like she's cut from marble, and her head is turned sharply, giving her an aloof, aristocratic, and almost untouchable air, while displaying her sharp, striking profile.
So was this the original uh,
The
big
original
goth
version,
girlfriend? Yeah.
uh, yeah, right. The original goth mommy.
Yeah.
So the original version of this painting showed one strap slipping down Gautreau's shoulder. Um, but that detail was small, but it mattered enormously, because salon culture, as well as Gautreau's reputation, was built on respectability. And the fallen strap suggested an uncharacteristic intimacy and an air of sensuality and seductiveness. And Sargent painted not just her likeness, but her image as an image.
Hmm.
And again, as stated previously, this was not a commission. Sargent pursued her for the painting. He wrote to a common acquaintance, quote, "I have a great desire to paint her portrait, and have reason to think she would allow it, and is waiting for someone to propose this homage to her beauty. You might tell her that I am a man of prodigious talent." Which I love that quote. So Sargent repainted the strap to its expected over-the-shoulder position later to try and dampen the furor that it caused, but the damage had been done, and the scandal of Madame X was not that Sargent painted Madame Gautreau as beautiful; it was that he painted beauty itself as something staged, brittle, and disturbingly self-aware. And he sent this painting to his studio in England and eventually sold it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1916. And it always remained his favorite painting, and he is very open regarding it.
Hmm. I can
So
see
this
why. This, yeah, if that would be an amazing piece to have hanging up in one's home.
Absolutely. It's a very stunning piece, and I think it has a lot of it has the Art Nouveau feel to it in a way, and we'll see that next week when we talk about Mucha. Um, while maintaining, the portrait style that Sargent was known for. And again, this was especially with the strap down, he painted kind of the aristocracy as more kind of behind the scenes of it a little bit,
Hmm.
and it really outraged a lot of people at the time,
Hmm.
especially the fallen strap because they were very uh because the seductiveness was very contrary to that Edwardian era um gilded age style of austerity that these people
Yes, it
like to
was
portray.
a very restrained self portrayal, and
Yep.
that level of, just seductiveness would have rankled people, even the Parisians, I'm sure, compared to just
Yeah.
the English.
Yeah. So again, it's just a stunning picture and a very like well done um like a capture of her image. Um and made her, like she's she's a lot more beautiful in that painting than she is here. And it may just be the photo, doesn't do her justice, but this portrait is stunning.
Hmm.
And it's easy to see why it was his favorite.
Oh yeah.
So moving forward here,
We must.
s- so after the 1884 salon of scandal of Madame X, and here's a picture of this is a photograph of him in the studio with the portrait, which I think it's awesome.
Mm, that is so cool.
Yeah. And this first, the man in red, this is a portrait by Sargent as well. It's called Dr. Posey at Home, and it was painted in 1881. And I have a smattering of his portraits throughout this whole presentation, so we're just gonna get used to seeing them. Um, so the society that had previously embraced Sargent began to turn on him. His commissions dried up, and he was no longer celebrated on the salon scene like he was before. And Sargent actually considered giving up painting for music. Um, and while he had previously painted exotic beauties, this is a Capriote from 1878. And this artist is Rosina Ferreira, who was or this subject. She was an international model, and um, and also models. And this is Carmela Bertagna from 1879, who was an international model.
Hmm.
They were not meant for public display, and he had painted society women. He had painted a society woman like an icon, but Paris society read the icon as exposure, and the scandal revealed the limits of society's acceptance of his boldness.
Hmm.
And once he crossed those lines, he kind of fell out of favor with the aristocracy. And as they're generally such a petty bunch, there was no going back.
Yeah.
So in 1885, Sargent began transitioning to England. English society was slow to embrace his work at first, But and his work was seen as somewhat avant-garde, or in Sargent's own words, beastly French, which I love that phrase as well. He's got some brilliant phrases. Um, he found himself between worlds. He was talented but not fully accepted, and he worked to establish himself, but he needed advocates in society. He made friends with Henry James, this gentleman here, and this is another uh, portrait of Henry James from 1913, um, and who was a prominent writer at the time. And between 1885 and 1886, he painted Carnation Lily Lily Rose at Broadway in Worcester, where he spent his autumn months with Anglo American artists and writers.
Hmm.
This painting became a success at the Royal Academy in 1887, and the painting was acquired through the Chantry bequest, who Francis Legat Chantry was a prominent sculpture artist in the early 19th century, and when he died, he left a large inheritance the uh, to the state,
Hmm.
to the country of England, or yeah, to the country of Britain, to purchase works for the museums, and so they used money from that to purchase this painting.
Huh.
And then Henry James wrote an article in the Harper's New Monthly magazine, which, Harper's Bazaar still around. And that, along with the painting, really did a lot to establish Sargent in society,
Hmm. Well, I think English society, right?
in English society. Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
so in September of 1887, Sargent crosses the Atlantic for only the second time in his life, and he went to New York to paint uh, Mrs. Henry G. Marquand, and this is Henry G. Marquand.
Hmm.
Um, and this is the portrait he painted of his wife. And he was a prominent banker and collector, and he was enthusiastically received into American high society. And he spent time in New York and Boston, where between the two he painted over 20 portraits, including Isabella Stewart Gardner, which I think this is a phenomenal portrait as well.
Wow.
The
That
background is really good.
that reminds me a lot of Klimt.
It does, with the gold filigree and stuff, with
Hmm.
the decoration in the background. Um, and she was a famous Bostonian art patron, and Miss Adrian Iselin, um, who was the wife of a prominent New York businessman.
Hmm.
In 1888, he received his first one-man show at the St. Botolph Club in Boston, which exhibited 22 of his paintings. And while in the U.S., he becomes friends with fellow painter, I missed that, Dennis William Bunker. Let me pull up that image real quick here.
So Dennis William, not Dennis Miller.
Yeah, Dennis William Bunker, or Dennis Miller Bunker.
Okay,
Damn it. Okay, there we go.
this guy.
This guy. So later that year, he returned to England, where he was joined by Bunker, where he completed this painting. And upon returning to England, he quickly becomes busy again. He begins to refine his portraiture, and he follows techniques of older masters, where he'd visit the space the painting was meant to hang, review the client's wardrobe, and find the most fitting ensemble. And some of his portraits were done in the client's home and others in his studio. And he continues to make portraits, not just a likeness of the person, but persona, costume, theater, and public image.
Hmm.
Um, which is very much like Van Dyke did
Yeah.
when because that's why the guys, or that's why the king brought over Van Dyke, was because of his ability to capture people in a grand and aristocratic manner. And that's what a lot of the Gilded Age society liked about Sargent as well. So in 1888, Sargent saw Ellen Terry. this woman here,
Oh my.
perform as Lady Macbeth
Macbeth?
at the
I mean,
Lyceum. Yeah,
Freudian
Macbeth,
slip there.
fitting. Yeah, at the Lyceum Theater in London. And he was struck by her appearance and performance, and he persuaded her to sit for him and painted her in full costume.
Hmm.
Which takes us to our next painting we're going to look at here.
Oh wow.
And yeah, this is Ellen Terry as Lady Macbeth in 1889. So it's oil on canvas and it measures 87 by 45 inches or 221 by 114.3 centimeters, and it currently resides in the Tate Britain Museum in London. And Ellen Terry was one of the most celebrated Shakespearean actresses in Victoria era Britain. In 1888, she starred as Lady Macbeth opposite Henry Irving at the Lyceum Theatre in London. And after seeing her performance, Sargent was struck by her. After seeing her performance, Sargent was struck by her performance and costuming, and he knew he had to paint her. So, of course, the key highlight, and this is the thing that really we're witnessing here in this painting, but one of the things that was really outstanding about the performance was the emerald green dress that she wears was created for the production
Hmm.
and was embroidered with iridescent beetle wing cases and blue tinsel yarn, which created a shimmering effect that made Lady Macbeth appear fearful and supernatural. The dress has a narrow border of Celtic designs, um, worked out in red and white stones, and is hemmed on the edges with and girt and grit with a gold belt. It was designed to look as much like soft chain armor and yet have something that would give the appearance of the scales of the serpent. And the painting depicts Terry standing erect, white faced, holding King Duncan's crown above her head. This pose depicted did not appear in Irving's production. It was invented by Sargent for the painting.
Hmm.
And of course,
Interesting.
this is it's one of Sargent's most powerful performance examples of performance portraiture. He's not just painting what Ellen Terry looked like, he's painting what it felt like to see her become Lady Macbeth.
Hmm.
And
You know, the only thing that would make this even more phenomenal of a painting is a little bit of splash of blood on the hands for Lady Macbeth
oh
there.
god. Well, there you know, I mean, you almost see it, but it's more just like the gold around the crown.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find really interesting about this painting is that from a distance it looks like a very, like a realist painting and you can see the fine detail, but when you zoom in, you do get that heavy impressionist vibe of the heavy brush strokes,
Mm-hmm.
the heavy quick brush strokes, and you can kind of just almost picture him just rushing through the painting, just slapping paint on the canvas.
You know, that's truly, you know, the more we're going into it, that's truly the remarkable thing about Sargent is he's able to kind of breach both styles so well that it's not until when we're zooming in and it's like, oh yeah, there's the impressionism.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you gotta he does such a good job with the with his own style that you have to spend a lot of time analyzing it to find the different styles buried within. Um, because he was just such a talented painter that he was able to combine those styles so effortlessly. So moving on here, so in by 1889, Sargent's professional standing had recovered in England, and he'd found a safer way to display his spectacle and gained wider acceptance as a result. And around this time, his career began to accelerate on both sides of the Atlantic. The demand for his work was so great that in 1890, he painted around 40 portraits in 9 months. The artistic landscape of the 1890s was dominated by portraiture and murals, and Sargent became one of the premier portraitists of the Gilded Age elite. And at his peak, he was sitting 3 people a day. He was sitting 3 subjects a day, which is crazy.
Wow.
And that talent made him famous, but it also trapped him in the demands for fashionable portraiture. He was a victim of his own success. Um, so he was not simply enjoying success; he was being consumed by it. And this success and his drive led to the creations of dozens of some of the most iconic portraits of people. So this painting is Mrs. Edward L. Davis and her son Livingston, and this was painted in 1890.
Hmm.
Um, this is his portrait of Theodore Roosevelt, which was painted, I think, in 1909.
Hmm.
And then this was the Earl of Wymus and March. And this is probably one of my favorite ones. This is Rosemary Ormond,
Hmm.
um, who is strikingly beautiful, and he does such a great job of capturing her beauty in this portrait, and it makes me understand, like, oh, that's why people loved him.
Yeah.
That's why.
Damn.
But also he painted powerful people, and amongst them were John D. Rockefeller.
Hmm.
And this is one of the most iconic portraits of Rockefeller as well. When you see, if it's not photographs, it's him. So, or it's this painting here. But then, talking of portraiture, that leads us into our next painting that we're going to discuss, and this is Gertrude Vernon, Lady Agnew of Lochnaw. In 1892, he painted this. It's oil on canvas, and it measures 50 by 39.7 inches, or 127 by 101 centimeters. And this is currently at the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh. And this is really Sargent's work at the height of his aristocratic portraiture confidence, when he was in the middle of just churning out work. Of course, the sitter was Gertrude Vernon, who was married to Andrew Noel Agnew in 1889, and he became the ninth Baronet of Lochnaw in 1892. She was newly elevated to titled society, and this work helped elevate her status in public. It displayed an image of an aristocratic grace that helped secure her place within higher society. And when the portrait was first exhibited in 1893, it was an instant success, and that helped secure Sargent's reputation in Britain, while also launching Lady Agnew as a high society celebrity. Oh, I had to take a drink. So the dress, as well as the sash and the silk backdrop, highlight Sargent's ability to capture fabrics. So, as opposed to the realism of the Baroque masterworks of Artemisia and Orazio Gentileschi, Sargent uses his kind of impressionistic influence to capture the looks of fabric in his own characteristic style. But the painting also has a psychological effect in that Lady Agnew is relaxed, but she's not casual. She appears to be at ease, but the stage is very controlled, and her steady gaze gives a hint of almost playfulness, bordering on seductiveness, while remaining dignified in her posture and composure. And with Lady Agnew, Sargent finally solves the problem that began with Madame X. He still paints beauty as performance, but now the performance is acceptable, admired, and irresistible. And this is the scandal of before transformed into the silk that his reputation is known for now.
Just fascinating.
So the yeah the I'm going to zoom in a bit. We'll zoom in a bit on the silk just to see. Um, when you zoom in, you see there's rough brush strokes. They're not. It's not the same controlled lines that we saw in the Baroque paintings. There's definitely a speed and a boldness, you could say. It sounds a little gay when you say it like that, but there's a speed and confidence to his work and to his style,
All right,
That
I have a terrible comparison. He is the
okay.
Bob Ross of portraiture.
I mean, kind of so. Like Bob Ross did use the wet on wet technique as well. And I mean, it's not just that he's painting the form specifically, it's that he's assembling an image that works with your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And and in a way that takes more talent than just painting the image, because if you can assemble something that draws your eyes into it in a way that makes your eyes uh, and your brain work to figure out the painting, then it's a lot more engaging of a work.
Oh yeah. Well,
So running short on time, we'll have to bust through some slides here, but go ahead.
just one thing on the consistency with the face. Yeah, the bodies are a little more abstract with the brush strokes, but the faces are very well defined, and that's kind
Yeah,
of a nice combination.
yeah, and she's a very beautiful woman, and he does a great job of capturing that. Or if she was not beautiful, he definitely made her look beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
um, in my opinion.
Oh, I just looked up a photograph of her. Yeah, no, he did a very good job.
Yeah. So we got 3 more slides to go in 8 minutes, so we'll bust through these real quick. So, at the turn of the century, Sargent had mastered the power of portraiture, and he grew wary of serving it. And by this time, he was at the height of his fame, and he'd become the subject of numerous caricatures by cartoonist Max Beerbohm, which this was one of the caricatures. Um, and he highlighted Sargent's kind of paunchy physique at the time, and this is a photo of Max Beerbohm. And as highlighted previously, he had created dozens of portraits and of some very prominent people. And then in 1907, at the age of 51, he officially closed his portrait studio and began to travel more.
Hmm.
He made several summer visits with his sisters to the Swiss Alps and other European vacation spots. But the world was beginning to change as well, and Sargent was changing with it. Which leads us to our last work that we're going to talk about today.
I mean,
Um,
goddamn, we
and
this is so when you talked about Sargent, this is the painting I wanted to make sure we did.
yeah, um, of course, it's such a change from his other works, but still so powerful. And it does such a great job of capturing the spirit of this time. Let me get the rough details out of the way. So, painted in 1919 in the wake of World War One, it's an oil on canvas and it measures 90.9 inches by 20 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, huge painting. Or 231 by 611.1 centimeters, and it's currently located in the Imperial War Museum in London. So Sargent had traveled to France with his friend and fellow painter Henry Tonks, and Tonks had described seeing groups of gas victims led in lines with their eyes covered. And the composition shows the soldiers in a processional line marching past the bodies of men in the field, highlighting the horrors of war and the aftermath. And each man depends on the one in front of him to lead him, showing the mutual dependence of men in war as they march on helpless in this brutal scene of death. And in this work, Sargent's gift for staging bodies and fabric and drama, it's redirected away from society and towards mass suffering. And the painter who once made silk shimmer now paints bandages, mud, blindness, and the terrible choreography of wounded men.
So there are some other interesting details. In the background, you actually see men playing football. It's that there's that dichotomy of
Oh,
the
yeah.
horrors of war and kind of that desperate need for release at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You know what? I didn't notice that before. I
Most
didn't
people
notice that
don't.
when I was putting this together. But
Most
yeah, you're right.
yeah,
They're
most
back
people
here in the back.
completely skip over that, and also the orderly kind of leading the men in both
Yeah,
lines that are walking. One's more an orderly, one's more of a actual physician,
yeah,
and just kind of the positioning. And because I've gone through these documents, uh, it's like it's in written um you know, documents, official war documents. It's like, this is how you're supposed to lead men who have been gassed, not from the front, but kind of from the side. So,
yeah.
and then everyone else
Which
follows along behind, which is fascinating. But it's to deal with, shell shock in a sense, so they still feel like they have some leadership, because they usually tried to put,
yeah,
the highest ranking NCOs in the front. Not always, but sometimes they tried.
yeah. Um, and this is really a stark and terrifying image of what happened during World War One.
Hmm.
And it really makes you understand why they kind of worked to ban chemical weapons and how and the use of them
Yeah.
because of just how cruel and inhumane it became. So let's move on to the wrap up here. Um, so just because I got a few more. So Sargent was not simply the painter of fashionable people. He was a painter of performance, of beauty, rank, costume, ambition, and public image, and then finally of historic catastrophe. His career begins in the glitter of society and ends in the shadow of war. And towards the end of his work, or towards the end of his life, he painted many works that show a transition to modern times. He created several works that look more Art Nouveau than traditional Sargent. This is one of his paintings. It's Hercules from 1921.
Hmm.
And also, he painted other things of Greek myth, including Orestes pursued by the Furies
Mm.
in 1921, and Atlas and the Hesperides, or Hesperides, in 1925. And the works move Sargent back towards myth and towards a decorative rhythm and allegory and mural design, but forward toward a more modern style of painting. And really, we've only been able to scratch the surface of Sargent's life and associations, and he will be revisited in later seasons. But just to put a period at the end of this one. So John Sargent died suddenly in London on April 14th in 1925 at the age of 69. And by then the world of his greatest portraits had already passed into history. The aristocrats, the actresses, presidents, heiresses, and industrialists he painted belonged to a society that had been transformed by war, modernism, and political upheaval. And his death closes the career of one of the last great painters of elite public image, an artist who kind of his fame began in scandal, but mastered in silk and ended by confronting war. So that's what I got for today. Um, that was a lot to go through, lots of paintings. And again, when you go look up his work, if you go to his wiki art page, there's 800 paintings on there, paintings and sketches.
Wow.
There's so many of them. And it was really hard to pick. It was really hard to pick ones that I specifically wanted to show and talk about. And so that's why we covered 6 paintings in this one instead of our normal 5. But on top of that, I included so many more of his works. Yet again, only scratch the surface. So
Well, and that's the thing. We're trying to do in an hour what some people spend lifetimes studying. And yeah,
right.
it's again, you do a fantastic job. Uh, just because distilling this down into something that's prescient and easily digestible for the audience, myself included, it is definitely a passion project, and that's the thing. It's like, and you go through an artist like this, there's so many options, and then just to cull out these and actually make them useful is
Yeah.
man, yeah.
Yeah, have to build a narrative around it. So next week we're going to be talking about Alfonso Mucha and the Art Nouveau movement, which began to dominate the advertising world of this time and was really one of the iconic early 20th century art styles, although its foundations go back farther than that. But anyhow, we're 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 at our end. So Bleach, again, thank you so much for joining me for this. Again, yeah, it is a passion for me to do this. I really do love uh doing these streams and learning about this stuff, and so I'm grateful that you are here to learn it with me.
It's important. We always conclude with, hey, yeah, go out and look at some art. It's important for your culture, for your past, and for your future. And yeah, Sargent's a great example of that, just because of the
Mhm.
eras he crosses through.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your art and your history, folks. So love it and embrace it, and we will see you next week.
Indeed. Cheers.